Hey, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're going to be talking about a very important book in the Spider-Man lore. I had my eyes on it the moment it was announced in the solicitations book, and I added it to my pull list. It has a legacy Spider-Man writer on it, so you know it's going to be good. That was an instant add to my pull list. That and the fact that the story takes place in Spider-Man's early years, when he's still going through some things. We're going to be going through the comic book itself, and I will be giving my thoughts and opinions on it, so spoiler warning ahead if you haven't read the comic book itself. And we're going to be covering Spider-Man Shadow of the Green Goblin #1. If you're enjoying this video at any point, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's jump right into this comic. What really drove me into purchasing this comic was the fact that it took place in Spider-Man's early years, and the comic book establishes right away that this is very early. Just about under a month since Uncle Ben has passed away and Peter and Aunt May are having to deal with the grief of it. They're putting on fake smiles towards each other so that they don't bust out crying in front of each other and just collapse. And the writer does a very good job with it. He goes into great detail about it, and that's the overall theme of the book itself. Peter gets to see how now Aunt May is having to deal with the burden of having to pay these overdue bills, and that's stressing him out as well as Aunt May. The early Spider-Man comics did establish that Spider-Man tried becoming famous with his act of, the spider with the strength and the webbing, and he did have an agent at the time, which this book covers that moment. The moment the Daily Bugle put out articles about Spider-Man being a menace to the city, that heavily decreased the popularity of Spider-Man, so his agent, the one that was giving him the TV gigs, wasn't able to actually get him any more gigs. He says that the work has dried up for the Amazing Spider-Man. No one wants to see the Amazing Spider-Man anymore. But Spider-Man begs him. He's like, dude, I'll do anything. Please just get me a job. Inevitably, the agent does find Spider-Man the job, but it's a birthday party for a kid. Nevertheless, he is getting paid, so he's gonna do the job. The birthday party moment. Oh boy. Now, before I go any further, heavy spoiler warnings ahead, because this is actually one of the reasons why I would heavily recommend the book. So Spider-Man gets invited to act for this birthday party for this kid. He shows up, he starts showing his act, he shows his strength, he shows how he's able to stick to walls. The kid's being so bratty, he's not believing anything that Spider-Man is even doing. He's just like, oh, you're sticking to walls? That's obviously suction cups. Your act is like a fake, bro. Spider-Man finally loses it and tries leaving the party, saying that he doesn't need that. He's already got a lot of things going on in his life. But this is the moment when the kid's mom runs up to Spider-Man and tries to explain to him that he shouldn't leave. She explains that it's been a few months since the boy has lost his dad, and so he's acting up that way. He's just been acting out over the grief of his father. Spider-Man then has a moment of self-reflection, and he starts thinking about how selfish he was with acting up on a kid who just threw a tantrum on him. And now that he knows he's going through some things, he takes the kid for some web swinging to really have the kid believe that he's Spider-Man. And just in general, give the kid a good birthday since he is going through all this trauma. What makes this story even better is the fact that the mom tries offering cash to Spider-Man at the end, but Spider-Man actually refused the cash because he told the mom that this event actually did a lot for him than the money ever would. To be quite honest, ladies and gentlemen, that sub-story almost had me bawling. It had the very aspects that you'd expect from the Spider-Man character, where he stops and actually self-reflects. Now with that self-reflection, oh boy, let me get into it. There's a huge moment where he's considering his abilities and the extent of his strength. Spider-Man comes across a purse snatcher and he confronts him. As mentioned earlier, the story gets really in detail with the level of grief that Peter's dealing with at the moment. And all the pain that he has internalized, he wants to release it on these criminals that he catches up with. And catching this purse snatcher, he wants to just go through this guy. But he remembers about an earlier interaction where he ended up putting this guy in the hospital, causing Spider-Man to realize he has no real understanding of the extent of his own power, or how to control it when it comes to his rage. Nevertheless, he does stop himself and webs up the purse snatcher and leaves, before causing any real harm to him. Then we get a second round of him trying to comprehend the extent of his power, when he fights the Proto-Goblin. Now, the Proto-Goblin, it seems to this story, is the first real test subject of the Goblin Serum. The comic goes a little bit into who the Proto-Goblin is at the moment, and there's a mystery behind his past that I'm sure the comic is yet to reveal. But Spider-Man has an altercation with the Proto-Goblin. Spider-Man has a moment where he snaps and he sends the Proto-Goblin flying. Instantly, Spider-Man starts feeling guilt over sending him flying because he remembers the person that he put in the hospital. So he's heavily concerned that he just offed the Proto-Goblin. Sure, he's an active threat at the moment, but Spider-Man's, he's not that kind of person. Or at least not yet. He's trying to become not that kind of person. He doesn't want to off villains. He just wants to deal with situations, the moral way. Then the comic also gets into Harry and Gwen's relationship before they actually met Peter in college. All that is definitely fun and well. I won't get too much into that because what I really want to talk about is the main theme of the comic, which is the Green Goblin. We already know Norman Osborn was pretty crazy to begin with, and the Green Goblin persona really didn't help with that. This comic establishes some pretty interesting aspects about Norman's personality and how he is as a character. It explains his own ambitions and contradictions. The story gets into how Norman Osborn really loves his son, but he also treats him horribly because he sees his love for his son as a weakness, and that's something he actually hates about himself. There's a side of him that really loves his son, and there's a side of him that just hates him for existing because it's his own weakness, the love for his son. The writer gets into some real heavy topics, and I really love the comic for that. So heavy, in fact, that at the end of the comic, Peter and Aunt May finally have a talk with each other where Aunt May totally snaps at Peter. And this has identical qualities to Peter snapping at the thieves that he comes across as he's, being a vigilante. Spider-Man occasionally unleashes his unrelenting strength that he doesn't know he has because he's snapping at all this grief he's having to deal with. And then you get Aunt May who's also snapping at Peter because he comes home all beaten up and he just brushes it off as like no big deal. Overall, ladies and gentlemen, this is probably some of the finest Spider-Man comic I've read in recent history. Now you're probably wondering, what about Ultimate Spider-Man? Isn't that like top god tier, bro? Well, yeah, they're cooking with that for sure. But that's a whole separate thing. They're taking their time with that story. With Spider-Man Shadow of the Green Goblin, I believe it's like a 4 or 6 issue miniseries. And so they really have to condense a lot. They put one of my favorite legacy Spider-Man writers on the comic, and I had to snatch this up. I had to know what it was about. I'm talking about DeMatteis. I don't know if I pronounce his name correctly, but all respect to the man. He knows his stuff. This comic is definitely one I would heavily recommend if you're a Spider-Man fan. When you look back on the comics that you've read that really have retained with you, that make you think, oh, hell yeah, this is why I love reading comics. This has got to be one of those. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of this writer. He's definitely a legacy Spider-Man writer for me. This dude is top tier. He's worked on some Venom stuff. I really enjoyed his Venom. He writes the character all fun. With this comic, it deals with some very serious topics, and it does it in the correct ways. Once again, I heavily recommend it, and I leave you with that, ladies and gentlemen. This video is definitely coming out before my ASM review. Both Ultimate Spider-Man number 3 and ASM came out on the same week, and I've had to prioritize the good comics. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, I will review ASM. We're gonna be on pace. And if you enjoyed this video at any point, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.